Well, we'll get started here. It's a little 10:15, a little past. Welcome. I am Chris Clark, Director of Youth and College Ministries here. I will be your tour guide for the next 2 weeks. We'll be talking about the Book of Job, and through the wild whirlwind of wonder is what I'm naming this. Just to give you some background to this class, this presentation for the next 2 weeks, which I hope is a presentation. Also, if you see someone who's popping up here and I don't see it, just kind of point to the screen and I'll get it. We accidentally made a waiting room, which we'll fix next week. I do hope it's more than just a presentation. I hope it's a bit of a conversation together, because I think Job is, if there's any book in the Bible that lends itself to conversation, disagreement, exploration, it's Job. This came out of, actually, as many of you know, I'm in seminary. I wrote a paper on this topic and really enjoyed it and got to explore this story in a way that I had not explored it before. And this has always been one of my favorite books because I think it always stands a little bit in tension with even like the whole of the Bible. Like, just when you think like, oh, I know what the gospel's about. I know what God's about. I know what suffering's about. I know what the Bible is saying. You read Job and you go, yeah, I'm not sure. Or Job goes, are you sure? So we're gonna explore this together. Hopefully you walk away with something. Hopefully you walk away with at least a question in your mind, something new, something that you hadn't considered before. That's always my hope, even if your life is not radically transformed by any of these things. So I want to start off with a question. How many of you have ever read through the book of Job, all 42 chapters in its entirety, and not a paraphrase, not a movie adaptation, not a sermon, not a class where someone, like this summarizes it? How many of you have gotten a chance to read all the way through? Okay, yeah, a few. What was that like? It's a lot. Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a long book. A lot happens. There are so many different angles you can come at this book, and I didn't see. Were there any online? Welcome to you guys. Any online who have read all the way through? Ernie, you've read all the way through. So, what I've heard is Job described as a polyphonic text. Any music people? I know we've got one. Anybody want to shout out what is polyphonic?
Voices.
Many voices. Yeah. And, sometimes we might read Job and say, well, here's the plot of the story. Here's the meaning of it. God gives the clear, direct answer at the end. We see what happens. Yeah. Job's not like that. There's some conflicting details or things that put us on edge, where we go like, God did what? What are some maybe conflicting details you've ever noticed in the book of Job? Or things that kind of create tension for you? If you remember, I don't know how long ago it's been.
Well, he never complains.
Job never complains? Okay.
Not really.
Okay.
I just started reading, at the beginning of the service, I was like, I guess I should look at Job. So I read the first couple chapters, but it's just, so not all 42. Satan's changing God's mind. Mm-hmm. That's disturbing.
Yeah, it is. We can say that. It's disturbing. And that God's like, yeah, sure, go for it. Yeah. What else? Anyone else? Anyone online?
It does not seem to tie in with the whole Moses tradition of law and so on. It's a much broader view of the relationship of humans and God than I think we get in the Genesis and Abrahamic Moses line of thinking.
Okay, yeah, and book is Job is a book of wisdom. So with Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, sometimes Psalms is thrown in there. So it is this book of wisdom. So and often the wisdom books read slightly different than like covenantal theology you might find in Genesis. Yeah, Mark.
Do you have any idea exactly when this was written?
Yes, and I'll get into that. Yeah, that's a good question. So what I want to first say is that what I'm coming at this story today in the next 2 weeks through is a lens of wonder. The class I took was called Wisdom and Wonder and Creation. And we looked at wisdom literature through the lens of wonder and awe. And this scholar, William P. Brown, he's a Presbyterian scholar, I believe at Columbia Seminary. He wrote this in his book on wisdom literature. He said, for all its agonistic drama, Job is fundamentally a book of wonder, which piques my curiosity because usually you think of it, it's a book of suffering. So it was a very curious thing to write and to say, which that always piques my interest to dig in more. And here I'm going to give you kind of my thesis where I'm hoping we're gonna go. This isn't to like give away the end, but just so we're all kind of on the same page. So my view, my sort of reading in that polyphonic cacophony is that God's wonder-filled whirlwind speech that happens at the end of the book is an event through which Job is brought back into free relationship with his creator and with the community of creation of which he is a part. Maybe that makes sense to you and maybe it doesn't. My hope is that by the end, this will make a little bit more sense. Yeah.
So what does Brown mean by wonder?
That's a good question. A lot of things. And so if anybody is a bookworm and wants to read more, he has a book called Wisdom's Wonder, and he gets a little bit more into that. He talks about the wound of wonder, how our wounding can actually be a way that we can engage with wonder. I forget who the poet is. Someone said, you know, the crack or the wound is how the light gets in.
Leonard Cohen.
Is it Leonard Cohen?
Yeah.
So it's kind of that idea of like our wounding and our suffering can actually be events through which can open us up to wonder if we're able. It's not a given thing, but Job is kind of an experience of that. And next week we'll get a little bit more into that of how Job engages with wonder, or God confronts Job with wonder. And we'll look at actually a couple of more modern examples of this, of people who have had some serious wounding in their lives, some pretty significant, well-known people in history, and how through engaging with creation and the divine in creation, they found healing and they found a reconnection with themselves and humanity and the wider world. So I always like to do this with our youth when we're talking about a story. See how can we tell this story together, and see if we can retell it with all the pieces that we've got. So I'm gonna do as little telling the story, and this is participatory. I want you guys to shout out as we go from chapter 1 through chapter 42. So how does Job begin? Sorry, you can shout out. He's wealthy. He's very wealthy. And what does that mean? He's got
Cattle, kids, wife,
slave servants. Yeah. Yeah. He's got a bunch of kids. Maybe not quite a dozen, but a bunch of kids. He's very happy, seemingly. Then what happens?
Well, isn't God sort of boasting about what a good guy he is?
Yeah. Well, before God shows up, who's roaming the earth? Satan is roaming the earth. So he's going about, and do you remember what Satan says to God? Anyone?
Nobody is good.
Yeah. He's kind of like, seriously, Job's that good. Like, that's too good to be true. He's like, I've been wandering the earth. That can't possibly be true. And what happens after that? Make a bet. God, makes a bet. God makes a bet with Satan. I mean, that seems a little shaky there. It seems a little irresponsible as far as God goes, but God makes a bet. Yeah.
I was just going to say the same thing. It's like a challenge. This man's he's pious only because of the blessings.
Yes.
So the concept of God who would even inflict and try Job is distressing.
Yeah. Yeah. So he offers this challenge, or Satan offers this challenge, and God says, all right, go for it. And what's the first thing that Satan does? It's a clue.
The house collapses on his kids and their wives. And
Yeah, his house collapses on the whole family except for his wife. His wife survives. What else happens? I mean, there's more than just the house collapsing. What else does he lose?
All his animals.
All his animals. What else? Who else? All his servants and slaves. There's a band of warriors, raiders that comes and kills them all. Yeah. Okay, so this all happens to Job. What's his response? You remember?
He's like, it's okay. God is still.
Yeah. All right, God. Like, you know what? This is awful, but like, God, I will trust you. I will trust you. It's all in your hands. Next thing that happens to Job. Swords all over his body, because what happens in the heavens, in the heavenly courts?
God,
Satan says,
you can harm him, but you can't kill him.
you can't kill him, and before that he says, like, you can take things from him, but you can't harm him. And now God's like, all right, you can harm him a little bit, which he gives him swords, and he scrapes it with the pot shards. Yeah, and then what's Job's response, or what happens after that? Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
His friends come to see him when he's in terrible shape.
Yeah, his friends come to see him, and this might be the best things that his friends do the whole story. They sit with him, they weep with him. They might tear their clothes in ashes and cover themselves in ashes, but they don't say a thing for like 6 or 7 days, and they just sit with him in his grief. And then
They open their mouths.
well, before they open their mouths, does anybody know what Job says? This is like maybe a slightly less kind of memorable part, but what does Job say before the friends all start speaking?
I haven't done anything wrong.
She had never been born.
Yeah, he curses the day of his birth. And you get this section where it's almost like an uncreation or a decreation story. You know, that's the darkest day, may, no light shine upon it. Wish I'd never been born. So he curses the day of his birth, which some scholars would look at that like, is he just cursing the day of his birth? Is he cursing God too? Like, is there a way that he is leveling an accusation against God for even bringing him into existence? There's those questions that start to pop up. And then what happens? Someone, I think, said it earlier.
Start talking.
Yeah, the friends are like, well, Job, this is your fault. Bad people always get punished. But aren't you lucky to have us as good friends? And, this is the bulk of the book, of them going back and forth with Job and back and forth with Job and back and forth with Job. We get that for, I forget how many chapters, over a couple dozen. And then what happens? Finally.
God shows
Yeah.
You say it, you shout it.
God talks to him.
God comes to talk to him. How does God? Just like, hey, buddy. Out of the whirlwind. The whirlwind, which is a pretty terrifying. I've never seen a whirlwind up close. I've never seen a tornado up close. I've seen videos of it, and it looks terrifying. But God speaks out of this. And what is God doing through those few chapters speaking to Job? What's he talking about? What's God talking about?
He's asking him questions about, were you there?
Yeah.
What did you do with?
Yeah, were you there? I like to think he's giving him a virtual tour of the universe.
Yeah.
God is saying, look at the heavens. look at the water, the land, the foundations of the earth. Were you there when they were set up? Did you set the ways of the rivers and the oceans? Then God goes on to animals. Do you know the gestation period of a wild goat? Do you control the eagle and the hawk in its soaring as it scavenges for food? Do you really control the war horse who laughs at the sword? And then goes even deeper and bigger. Do you remember the two creatures God confronts Job with? Creatures of mythical proportions. Someone's got Leviathan and Behemoth, which are these, they resemble these potential, creatures like a hippopotamus and an alligator, but they are much more and bigger than that. They're these mythical creatures of like sea beasts and just a terror. And God confronts with that and says, really, do you think you have so much control over life in the world as even these creatures? And then finally, what do we get in the end?
Restoration.
What's that?
Restoration.
We get some kind of restoration. Yeah. Job is back with his family. He's got a new family. His family's not resurrected from the dead. He's got new kids, new daughters, new sons. He's got, I assume, like his cattle and his livestock back. But there's a scene of restoration here. So how satisfactory does that feel to you? Your ums give me some indicators. Yeah, in some sense, like, oh, great. Like Job's story kind of has a restoration, but then you think back and go, yeah, but what did God do in the beginning? Like, there's this tension there. So I want to step back for a moment. Thank you for helping me tell the story, by the way. I want to step back for a moment and situate us in the kind of literature that Job is, which is wisdom literature. So it's in the context, if we think of Job and Proverbs. Proverbs, a good chunk of that book was written, estimated like 11th to 13th century. And, this would have mostly been wisdom and guidance for more wealthy communities, more wealthier people. Not to say that was only for wealthier and more well-to-do communities, but people who had access to education, that was what was taught. And it's very ancient. It's the very traditional. If you do this, you reap these rewards. You live a righteous life, God will reward you with blessing. You live a wicked life, God will punish you. That's very condensed. There's a whole lot more to it. But that's the general, we'll say, wisdom of the day. Now Job comes in. We don't exactly know, and I take these with a grain of salt. We don't exactly know when these were written, but there's a lot of estimations that around 6th century BCE. And Job comes along, this story, and it's been described as an anti-wisdom wisdom because it begins to challenge a lot of the wisdom of the day in Proverbs. Where Job is a righteous character. He's lived a good life. He's treated people with justice and righteousness. And yet, he is reaping the punishment of a wicked person. It doesn't compute. And a lot of that is pushing back against, like, well, if God is really just, then why is this happening? I mean, God, I know you said Job doesn't accuse God. I'd like to say Job doesn't necessarily curse God, but he gets pretty darn close with the accusations that he levels. So Job is this pushing.
Explain what E stands for.
BCE?
Yeah.
I think it's before Common Era? Yeah, before Common Era. So again, you're working backwards. So 11th, 13th is later, and then this is closer to our century. The math is always weird in my head with that one. So Job is coming in, sort of the new kid on the block, and going, wait a minute, the wisdom of the day doesn't always quite work out as you're telling me. And it's kind of a pushback. I won't say gentle pushback, because I don't think it's always gentle, but it's challenging it. So that's just the context of where we are here. Now, it would be impossible in the span of 2 weeks to look at the entire book of Job. So I'm not going to do that. I am going to, and putting my cards on the table, I'm going to be looking at some very specific things with you all and leaving some things out. And that's okay. I think there's so many, like we said, it's a polyphonic text, and it may be more beneficial to say, we're going to look at it this way or that way, or through this lens or that lens, and just be honest about it, rather than trying to integrate and saying it all works together. It's all a cohesive whole. I saw Ernie's hand up first.
Chris, I have a question. You say it's probably 6th century, and that coincides with destruction of Jerusalem, with Babylonian captivity, and that strand of scripture tends to say, because you've been bad, you are being punished. Mm-hmm. And this seems to be either saying that's not the whole story, or wait on, there's a better conclusion. What do the scholars say about the relationship of Job to what's happening within the history of Israel and Judah?
That's a good question, and I'll say I probably don't have the time to explore that at the moment, but my guess is a lot of scholars would say, like, it's not just in this century this was what was happening, of everyone believed that God was punishing for the sins of Israel, and that was just widespread. Every single person bought into that. But there were probably multiple kind of understandings of this, and I think we can even see that sometimes even in the prophets. I think it was Isaiah and Amos maybe were writing around the same time, and one's a lot more fiery than the other. So my guess is there's probably multiple understandings of what's going on at that time with the exile. Yeah. Okay. But that's a great question. Yeah. So I want to look at the prologue together, and I want to define Job. This was something new for me, to look at Job from a different lens. Job is an overly pious community leader, and I use that overly pious with intention. And I will look at some of the details here just to make my case, I guess. Okay, so Job is blameless and upright, one who feared God, turned away from evil, the greatest of all people in the East. How many people do you know fit that definition? 0. Thank you, Jody, for the honest answer. It's a lot. I've never met anyone, even some of our greatest leaders, our greatest, faith leaders, Christian leaders, political leaders, social movement leaders, great people, they don't necessarily fit that to a T. There are flaws. Job has no flaws, apparently, at the beginning of this story. He also has he's got 10 children, thousands of livestock, servants, and slaves. So this is describing Job. And next, we have Job's... thank you. We have Job's sort of, I'll say, posture with his family, which is where we start to see the overly pious nature of Job. So Job's kids like to spend time together. They hold feasts pretty regularly, family dinners. It never says Job joins them. It says his kids got together. The kids eat and drink together. They enjoy one another's company. Job's worried that they've sinned or that they're sinning. The kids enjoy community regularly, and Job anxiously offers sacrifices just in case they've sinned. You never can be too careful. Job is an overly pious community leader. And I don't say that as a slight. I don't say any of this is like Job's actually bad when we say he's good. I'm just trying to define a little bit of what I see here. So yeah, Job doesn't seem to be able to engage with his family in the way that he could be. There's sort of this loss of resonance with his family, and I don't know. I look at this and I go like, what kind of relationship does he actually have with his kids, with his family? Yeah.
So in the context of the times, would he have been seen that way? Do you think? Do you think the writer is creating kind of this character on the surface looks good, but then even in the beginning you go,
I always leave that open. I think Hebrew is a very interesting language, and Hebrew poetry and writers, like there's more going on than what we see in English. So I always leave that up to like the writer may have been offering this kind of like subversive little line that you got to kind of pay attention to it or you might miss it. So I think that's what could be going on here. I don't actually know, but that's my guess. So as we saw back here, Job is one who feared God. Now, what does the fear of the Lord mean, as you understand it? Respect. What else?
In awe.
In awe, yeah. Anything else we'd add to that definition? Anyone online? I love the Kindles right now. Anyone else? What was that?
Worships God.
Worships God. Okay. Yeah, I think those are all great definitions. So William P. Brown, which I quoted before, he says, the fear of the Lord mobilizes the self for the pursuit of wisdom, which fear of the Lord, awe, worship. But it's not a paralyzing fear. It's a posture of humble, receptive reverence, not the kind of fear that walks on eggshells. Mm-hmm. This to me feels like fear walking on eggshells. My kids might have sinned. I've got to offer the sacrifice. I've got to do this. I've got to do this regularly. Job does this regularly all the time. So this is what I'm trying to paint a picture of Job. Yes, an upright man. Yes, a community leader. But he's also got some underlying, I'll call it baggage, where he is tense. This piety has actually gone past just the fear of the Lord. It's maybe gone to this walking on eggshells, paralyzing fear. Now, as I promised, we're going to skip over some things because we don't have time. And for this reading, and again, I always try to be upfront about what I'm doing. For this reading, we're going to set aside the section of the prologue of God and Satan making a wager. There are readings that will take that into account. For right now, I'm going to set that aside because I don't know how much it will kind of lend itself to this conversation. So I don't want to say it's invalid. I don't want to say we should forget about it. It's no good. Just for right now, we're gonna push it off to set it to the side. So we get through all of Job. We get through the suffering. We get to his friends going back and forth. He's saying, I'm innocent. They're saying, well, you must not be because A, B, and C. And the argument really doesn't change. It just gets more and more intense as they go. And we're going to, Yahan. If you think of kids arguing, it just like elevates. And it really doesn't resolve. But then God responds in the whirlwind. And before I get into this, I'm curious, those of you who have read the whirlwind speech or kind of understand what Job is going through, his suffering, that this is how God responds. Think about, how do you feel about God's response? Is it satisfying? And why or why not? How would you answer those questions? Yeah, Paul.
Well, if you think of God as like all-knowing, all-benevolent, all-powerful, the whirlwind is definitely all-powerful, but not so much all benevolent, though,
Mhm.
it seems like.
A whirlwind can do a lot of destruction. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the forces of nature, and that's also part of what's baked into reality too. So
Yeah.
It's chaotic, isn't it?
It's chaotic. Yeah. How do you feel about that? Is that satisfying, the way God responds with this kind of chaos? How do you feel?
I see it as part of God's trying to give Job some perspective. I mean, the whirlwind really goes along with "Were you there when?" series of questions of saying, Job, you're only seeing such a small part of the whole reality. Let's have a little humility.
Yeah. Yeah, as Job is, a lot of pretty much all of the debate back and forth with his friends is just about Job, this one life on earth. And God confronts him with like all life on earth to kind of give him some perspective, or like, this is where you are. Yeah, that's good. Yes.
As a Christian, and we know that we're saved through Christ's work, I see this as Job's works related. He thinks because he's done all these things and followed all the rules, that he's blameless, and that's works based. And then on the other hand is you can't know God's mind. You can't know, no matter how good he is, he can't know what God is thinking or planning.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there with, maybe ironically, I think Job experiences some grace through this, through God's response. And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean a little bit later. But yeah, I think like maybe because in the wisdom of the day, you live your life with righteousness and justice and humility and fear of the Lord and blamelessness. You reap those rewards. You don't, you reap the other rewards. And a lot of wisdom is the gaining of wisdom was toward like health, wealth, and progeny. So you live a righteous life, like the generations after you will thrive because you have lived this righteous life. And wealth will come to you, riches, and there's this cause and effect. Like I do this, I'll get this.
So I mean, for me, God's response basically comes down to, I'm God, deal with it. And it occurs to me that for me, in my life as it is, it feels like, okay, that's kind of an okay response. If I lost a child at Sandy Hook, I might feel different about, I'm God, deal with it. I think, the depth of tragedy or loss that I've experienced really shaped God saying, I'm God, deal with it.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point of tension to bring up, that if God were to show up in this way with a tragedy, an unjust tragedy like that, would this really feel satisfying to me? It wouldn't for me. Right. I would be mad at God. Say, really, that's your answer? Yeah. So even like contextually, what kind of suffering we're going through? Yeah.
I think that's deeply ingrained in our culture too, that if you work hard, show up for work, do what you're told, obey the rules, that you'll have some kind of reciprocal loyalty from the company.
Yeah.
And that has vanished in the last few decades.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of, in my lifetime, I've heard the pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and which negates like all these other factors that affect people's ability to do their jobs or to work or to reap benefits and things. It's not so black and white. There's some gray areas there.
I wonder, Chris, if Job was so intent upon doing good and being righteous and blameless that he didn't develop a relationship with the Lord. That he was so focused on that stuff that he really didn't have. And so perhaps this was part of God's way of bringing him, granting grace and bringing him into, a community.
Yeah.
And I guess if we have such strong faith, you think, well, if this is God's response, that's what he chose to do. How can I learn from this experience?
Yeah.
This reading?
Yeah. There's a possibility of humility there, of like, all right, pull it back a little bit, and let's see what, our piety can get beyond God.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't there also some sense of entitlement that maybe God is trying to tamp down? I mean, Job did all the right things, and so he feels this entitlement, so much so that he's afraid of losing that entitlement because his kids are doing something wrong. So he's got this level of entitlement stuff, and maybe God's trying to tamp that down, like, just because you did this, doesn't mean that you get this reward or whatever. Like,
I think you're right on that. I think God is, again, like, humbling him to say, remember where these gifts come from. I mean, in some ways, like, God may be pushing back against the wisdom of the day, to say, like, whoa. Just because you do all the, quote, right things doesn't mean you're automatically entitled to all the blessings. Yeah. So what I find interesting, and I think the thing that I found most compelling in the last year, is God's response to Job is not addressing his suffering. He responds to him with a non-anthropocentric centered creation. He paints a picture of all creation, and besides Job, who's just listening, there's not a human in sight. That's a strange response. If someone's suffering, someone loses a child in Sandy Hook, and you go, gosh, look at all these trees in this wilderness. Like, who do you think you are? It's a bit of a strange response, if we're honest. But I think there's actually something here that we can take away of how and why God responds this way. So in ancient Near East culture, in Job, even as a fictional character, like, there would have been some enmity or tension of humanity and the wilderness, or humans and wild creatures. I mean, the way that lions are talked about in scripture, I mean, lions tear and they capture and they devour. Like, a lion is a terrifying thing. I mean, we see them in the zoo all the time. They're not quite as terrifying behind the cage, but when there's one outside of your town that might potentially hurt you or harm you, there's some reasons to be terrified. And there's even so much in sort of ancient Near East kind of understandings of the wilderness and wild animals that there begins to be this correlation of, like, well, those wild creatures are, like, maybe not evil, but, are not good. They are a threat. And you can kind of see, as things become like, oh, well, they're a threat, you can kind of see them like, well, they're not good. They are against my well-being. They threaten my well-being. You can even see it how Job kind of talks about the poor here. He says, they thrust the needy off the road. The poor of the earth all hide themselves. Like wild asses in the desert, they go out to their toil, scavenging in the wasteland, food for their young. He's describing the plight of the poor as a donkey, a wild donkey, not one that's been tamed, but one that has to go forage for its food. He's not describing a good picture. He's trying to use this metaphor as, like, this isn't a good thing. And so creatures in this language, certain creatures that are not under human control or human, what's the word, like taming, begin to be not seen quite as good. You can see here in chapter 30, through want and hard hunger, they gnaw the dry and desolate ground. Among the bushes they bray, under the nettles they huddle together. A senseless, disreputable brood, they have been whipped out of the land. So Job is describing the people who have now kind of turned on him, who he used to defend. They're now saying, like, well, you must have done something wrong. Can you guess what animal he's comparing them to. There's a giveaway word here, I think. Yeah.
Right.
Bray. What brays?
Donkey.
The donkey. Yeah, wild donkey. So he's describing the people who are now against him, who he's having to like argue with and fight with this kind of negative animal language. There's some very interesting research that came across of how comparing people to animals can is a form of oppressive and prejudiced language. That this particular scholar kind of wonders, like, is this happening a little bit in Job? Is Job kind of like showing some of his true colors here? So there is this. Job is using animal language, wild animals, as a way to describe, like, oh, they're bad, or describe what's bad in the world. And yet God's answer of non-human creation is saying, hey, all those things are actually really good. The donkey that scorns the tumults of the city is my creation. The horse, the war horse that laughs in the face of fear at your swords is my creation. The ostrich who lacks wisdom and laughs at you is my creation. So everything Job has said or uses this language of, animals, wild animals as a negative thing, God goes, no. This is my creation. And even goes as far as to say the Leviathan, the behemoth, which it would have been terrifying. I mean, imagine a sailor sailing on the sea and you're going, there could be a Leviathan under here. How terrifying. So he's saying even these creatures that you fear, that you are terrified of, that are a threat to you, they are good and they're my creation. And they are a part of this created world, which you are a part of. There's also something about laughter in this response too. If you look specifically at the animals, a lot of them laugh at humanity. So don't get offended. The wild ass, it scorns the tumult of the city. Think of that as like this kind of laughter rejecting the control of humanity. The ostrich spreads its plumes aloft. It laughs at the horse and rider.
Is this God saying this?
This is God saying this. Thank you. This is God now speaking out of the whirlwind to him. The war horse, it laughs at fear and is not dismayed. It does not turn back from the sword. And Leviathan, clubs are counted as chaff. It laughs at the rattles of javelins. It laughs at your weapons of war. All right, sink in for a moment.
Can you tell us about the illustration?
Yeah, so this is William Blake. He did a whole bunch of prints telling the whole story of Job. So this is the scene where God is pointing to, so Leviathan is the sea beast underneath, and Behemoth is the one that looks, it's got like the tusks hanging out. But these are the things of nightmares. And God goes, that's mine too. This tragic laughter where Job has used wild creatures as metaphors to describe things that are bad, or to describe those who he sees as wicked, or maybe even uses as a way to enact prejudice against someone by describing them as a wild ass. Those animals laugh in objection to that kind of language. There's another scholar I was reading, they talked about the tragic laughter, how in oppressed communities, laughter can actually be a way to resist oppressive powers. When you don't have a whole lot of power to like get out from under it, you can't escape it, you don't have a lot of social or political or military or whatever power, laughter can be your best weapon to laugh in the face of those who would put you down. And this person, the scholar, is saying, seems like these animals are kind of doing that. They're going like, these humans, they think they're the center of it all. You know, they think they can control us, they can tame us. Like, no. Like, we laugh at you. That's hilarious. You think that you are in complete control of this creation, or that you are at the center of this creation. Which is another way, like, I think that God kind of starts popping Job's bubble here. It's like, okay, it's not all about you. There's a bigger story. You are a part of something greater. And I don't think God is saying, Job, you're just dust, you're nothing. But God is welcoming Job into a bigger picture that you are a part of something even greater than you even understood. So we're only halfway through here. We've still got another week to go. So far, how does this reading sit with you? We'll take the last 10, I know we have till 11:15, so 10 or 15 minutes just to have some conversation. How does this reading sit with you? How does it compare with your current or past understandings of Job's story? And what other reflections do you have at the moment?
Yeah. Well, you started out talking about how Job was sort of a counter to a lot of the other books of the Bible, stories of the Bible and whatnot. And this last part here kind of strikes me interestingly, because the Genesis story says that God gave man dominion over the animals of the earth. And now God is saying, well, maybe that's not quite so.
Right.
And so it's an interesting counterpoint to Genesis at this point.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Like, and whether we read it as dominion or stewardship or something, like, even as we read, I hear a lot of people read the first Genesis account where humans are the last thing that are created. And after humans are created, God says, God looked at creation and said, that's the first thing God said, it is very good. And sometimes people have interpreted that as like, oh, now that humans are here, they were like the one that made it very good. Which is interesting, because God doesn't say, well, the humans were very good. It seemed to me that the whole of creation, now that it's completed, but we sometimes read that as, oh, now that humans are here, it's very good, which puts us at the top. And yeah, to your point, Ken, like, God's seemingly maybe reversing that a bit, or at least like pushing the brakes on that. And there's no more stark way to do that than setting a picture of creation where humans are not just at the bottom or equal, but like they're just not there. I think this Bible's sometimes good at doing that, where I've heard it, I think it was Amy Jill Levine said, like, some of the passages in scripture are like a cold shower. Like, it's shaking you out of what you thought to be true or what you understood as like rock solid truth. Yeah. Others? Anyone online? Or in the room?
I'm struck that the story ends with God taking the action to restore Job's fortune. It's not that Job did anything, but the text is very clear that the Lord restored the fortunes of Job. It's still, and one would hope that maybe reflected Job's understanding then, that this was not of his doing, but of God's blessing.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the second half we're going to get to next week. As I think you bring up a good point, Ernie. God restores Job's fortune, and we'll also explore how Job is transformed, not just given everything back, but like what is the transformation that's actually happened for him in his life at the end of the story, that I think we don't often see unless we're paying attention to how his life is described compared to from beginning to end. So yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, it strikes me that the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, the beginning and the end, God is pretty arbitrary.
Mm. Can you say more about that?
So he takes or lets Satan just basically take everything away from Job because of a bet or a dare. And then at the end, he gives everything back in a greater measure, but not clear that just because God does.
Yeah.
And I don't see a reason. Okay, because Job was so faithful, now we'll give everything back. It's just, Lord taketh away, the Lord giveth.
Yeah.
Deal with it.
And that's part of the reason why, you know, like I said, we set that part of the prologue to the side. Partly because there can be complications when we understand how these books actually were written and put together. For example, some scholars believe that Elihu, which is a fourth friend that we actually don't hear about at the beginning, may have actually been an addition a little bit later on. Because you technically can read the whole book and take out Elihu's part, and the book still makes sense. Like Job is complaining, and then God answers him. But instead, there's this character who hasn't been there until suddenly, and he is speaking about the glory of God. It's much more, I'll say, like theological and more sort of wonderful and ecstatic. But yeah, some people think like, oh, you could read the book without this, and it would still you could still get a lot out of it. And I think there's some debates as like how much is the wager part been there the whole time? Did that develop in later? So that just creates some complications. So setting it apart, like if you include that, you go like, yeah, the wager part doesn't make sense with God then just suddenly going, I'm God, deal with it, and then restoring Job's fortunes. Yeah.
Gabrielle has her hand.
Gabrielle.
You're on side.
Yeah, there. Did I do it? Yeah. I don't know how to say this, but I think God is making a reset for human beings back to the creation when he was the big person. And people had gotten so carried away with we're doing everything and we're following all the rules right. And now we should be top dog here. And God says, it's bigger than you think. Let's go back to the beginning where it all started. I'm the one that's the powerful one.
Yeah, there is a reset. God is resetting, I think, Job's perspective to a less centered, having him less centered in the world. I mean, he's the center of his community. Like he meets people at the gate. He's, you know, if you're the most blameless, God-fearing, you know, righteous person, like you're going to be the center of attention in some way. But yeah, it's kind of like a resetting. Yeah, Paul.
I mean, it didn't come up much, but I'm curious about your thoughts on with Job's friends that eventually start to say, well, you must have done something. And that's kind of the traditional thing. And then Job says, no, you're wrong. I didn't. And then God, I think, says, the friends were wrong. It wasn't that you'd done something wrong.
Yeah.
So it's really undermining that whole worldview, that whole understanding. It's almost a karmic understanding, which is kind of traditional. I think, you know, and the belief in karma, I think, is prevalent today. Maybe people don't use that term, but
yeah.
But it undermines that. But what does it replace it with? You know, because he supports God as saying, Job, you know, your friends were wrong.
Yeah.
And then he's coming at it from a completely different direction.
Yeah. And that's, and God says, God does respond to the friends and say, you have spoke wrongly of me. But God says about Job has spoken correctly.
Right.
Which is, again, like interesting because Job's been lobbing these accusations at God.
Right.
Job's been angry at God. Job has been just at his wit's end. And God doesn't say well, because you almost cursed me or you weren't polite to me, you know, you've spoken wrong. Job's wrestling seemingly is what God loves about his speech. Yeah, yeah, Jenny.
Chris, the beginning of the story, we all see that Job is blessed. There's no doubt about it. But what we don't talk about is that even though it was all taken away, that doesn't negate that he'd been blessed. And that's almost, to me, the sin is that he thinks that since everything's taken away, or his friends, he's done something wrong. He was blessed. That doesn't mean it's forever.
Yeah, maybe he's holding on to that a little too tightly. One of the people who I was bringing into this conversation, I was reading the story, I was looking at commentary, scholars, and everything. Was actually this current sociologist named Hartmut Rosa, who is from Germany, and he has a little book here. I always like to, if you're interested, if you're a reader, it's called The Uncontrollability of the World. And his read of modernity, where we are today, is so much of our modern world is about controlling outcomes, of getting everything under our control so we mitigate risk to the very ends of the earth. And we make sure that we've basically got control of it. And yet his point is that always seems to kind of backfire eventually. And he says, imagine a country that is, we're gonna increase production of building and our economy, and we're gonna, build these communities, and they start deforesting hillsides. It's like, great, we've got, jobs created, and we've got places where people can live, and we can, grow things, grow the community, grow the economy. And he says, well, rains come, and those hillsides create mudslides. So in your endeavor to control the outcome of your economics, your nation states, your communities, to make sure we've harnessed it all, you've actually created a situation where something out of your control, you can't control a mudslide once it's started. And he's not someone who offers here's the solution, but kind of I think he reads the room correctly, that we are in a point where we do try to control things a lot. Especially if you live in a wealthier country with the means to do things, the resources, the political capital, the global capital, you often think this is, we're the leaders, we've got it all under control, we deserve this, we've got that, we're gonna do it all, we're gonna progress to a utopia. And I think that what his argument is that actually leaves us with a relationship to one another and a relationship to the world, the earth, that lacks a kind of resonance. He calls it becomes a relationless way of existence with one another.
Isn't that kind of idolatrous though? Because, you're putting your own abilities, your own creation abilities or whatever above God's. You're saying, I did this. I earned these things. I brought these things into my life. Even with Job, he had more concern about keeping all the things that he had, that he was blessed with, but that is almost idolatrous, because you're wanting and worshiping and putting that above, your trust in God and your faith in God.
I think it puts us at the center, and we like to think we do all kinds of things to make sure we've got things under control. I think both in our intimate personal lives, the way we personally live in the world, and also on bigger stages in the world. I think Job's the whirlwind speech actually has a lot to say for how Christians can advocate for and speak about creation care and eco-justice and climate change, as to say, look, we've got a story right here where we are not the center of this. How do we take care of this place of which we are a part, not as something that is just mine to get me ahead or ours to get us ahead as the leaders or whatever. I think there's a lot there to kind of help us, give us a foundation of how we do that. One more, and then we'll sort of.
Yeah, I was thinking, so that's the tension of science,
Yeah.
because the scientific method was developed not simply to understand our world, but to control it. And without a context of creation, then there's no limit.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the, I mean, I say there's a total believer in science, right?
Yeah.
And facts and all that. But there's that tension when control has no context in which our control is supposed to be exercised.
Yeah. Yeah, and science can help us understand and like have a grasp on everything. At its worst, at its best, it can open us up to wonder. I mean, the best scientists will say, like, yeah, we're always asking questions. We never assume that we have found, like, there's always something more to discover. But, to your point, like in our modern day, when you say, like, do you know the gestation period of a wild goat? Well, actually, yes, we do. We've got Google to tell us that.
Yes, Siri.
That's right. Ask Siri. Yeah, as great a tools as these can be, they can also be something that pulls us away from a resonant relationship to one another and to the created world. And I think those relationships are how we encounter God. And I think this is, I'm kind of making the argument, this is where God is trying to take Job a little bit. Someone who's really tried to grasp things with his excessive piety of this traditional wisdom of the day. And he needs a bit of a reset. And God's trying to do that here. Yeah, Betsy.
One thing I've learned in the past couple of years in doing some of the Bible study we've done, talk about the fear of God. It's not, fear is not really a good word. It's the awe. It's the awe of God. And that's what you're talking about. The awe of God in the science thing. Because I agree with Steve.
Yeah.
It's about the awe that we need to be in wonder. And any scientist will tell you that the more they learn, the more they don't understand.
Yeah.
Because it's amazing. It's amazing. And that's what we have to appreciate, is that this thing that we call God, to give it a name, we call that so that we have something to understand, the awesomeness of this.
Yeah, technology and science can only get us so far. We need kind of a spiritual foundation to help us see this world with reverence and awe and wonder.
And then to deal with it morally.
Yeah, and to deal with it morally. Yeah. It's sometimes in this conversation we go, well, we can create the technology to save us from this and get us out of this, and then go like, okay, maybe, but also that creates other issues. And so how do we posture ourselves in a way that's more wonder-filled and awe-filled? And I think it's a great point with fear of the Lord. I heard someone describe it as, imagine you're surfing out in the ocean and it's just you on the board in the middle of the ocean, and you see a whale swim under you. I mean, whoa, that's so cool and terrifying, because all it has to do is go up and, lift you off your board, and, you're like, well, what could happen? But you're also like, this is such a cool experience. So it is this awe, this like, wow, what is going on here? Yeah. And I don't think it always has to be those profound experiences too. I think wonder can happen in small moments of our lives. So we're at time. I don't want to take away anybody's time for the weekend or the Sunday. So next week we're going to finish out the story, and I'm going to explore some of these questions. What does Job's healing look like? Ernie kind of talked about Job's restoration, how God restores Job, and I think that takes a very specific form that we have to pay close attention to the words in the prologue to see how Job has actually been changed. And not just in his thinking, but in his actual life and practice. We did kind of get to this a little bit, but what's the role of wonder and creation in Job's transformation? Why is God's response actually a really helpful one? And then want to, I think most importantly is, how is that going to transform us? How does that story take shape in our own bones? And how does wonder help us engage with one another, with the world? I want to keep talking about that, but I won't. So we'll call it here. Let me close us in a word of prayer. Holy God, who answers us in still small voices and in the wild whirlwinds of creation, fill us with wonder, fill us with awe, in the face of our joy and in the face of our deepest pain and suffering. May you transform us. May the story take shape in our own lives, our own flesh and blood, our very bones, that we might be transformed to be people who see and experience a resonant relationship with one another and with our non-human neighbors, this creation of which we are a part. May we continue this journey, this conversation. May it be full of life and curiosity. And may you take us home and bring us back safely in the week to come. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. I hope to see each one of you. And if you want to invite a friend to come for the next one, do that too. But thank you all. Enjoy your Sunday.
Yeah.